Could I ask a question of maybe Mr. Schwartz? These have been all glowing testimonials, and I guess I would want to know, in your judgment, how representative are these statements of the full faculty at the three different schools?
I never want to speak on behalf of entire faculties. I would say, generally speaking, most of the schools share their sentiments. I think you'll always hear a faction of people that maybe don't like it. So, I won't ever speak on behalf of people, but I think, like with anything, you'll tend to hear some people that are proponents, and you'll hear some that won't. This is the group that showed up. I sent an invitation out twice. Sent one out a couple weeks ago and sent another reminder yesterday. I apologize, no one from Rose Hill showed up. Some of them actually told me that they were going to come, and so I was surprised I didn't see them.
I have a follow-up question on that, Mr. Schwartz. I had heard, and again, because it's, I had just heard it, I'd like confirmation of it one way or the other. When a school, I guess there are 4 schools now that use BT, is that right?
We have 3 elementaries. We have a 5th grade at a 4th school, and we have 9th and 10th at the high school.
The 5th grade is where?
At Kemp Elementary.
Yeah, okay. Someone had told me that to be adopted for the BT to be adopted by one of the schools, it required a 70% vote of the teachers. Is that true, do you know?
Well, I know, I feel like from last spring, our data and our superintendent, that was the criteria that he had set. He wanted the school. It really requires that you're all in for it. So not having exact percents, I do remember there was 100% I had seen somewhere out of Rose Hill, which I was like, wow, 100%. That's quite telling. I feel like Adams City High School was somewhere in the lower 70s. I don't recall seeing anything at Central in particular. But yes, that's the criteria. He's a believer of, if you're not going to be all in, you shouldn't do it. And I believe that for most programs, if you're going to bother running it, you need to be all in. Otherwise, programs don't work. They just don't. It's been my experience.
Right. Dr. Abrego, do you know if that was, did those votes take place? And was
Yes,
it
they
a
did.
secret ballot or an open ballot?
We just went to the school. If you could just let me see Ms. Boykin. Ms. Boykin, I believe I went to your school too. And I think we just had to vote by me speaking up and asking the staff if you want it, we have to vote. And if the majority of the people now, we don't have to have 100% buy-in, but I think we did ask for at least 70. And then the ones that, maybe did not vote for it, they were willing to go along with it. I mean, it was consensus that we'll go along, So, again, I'm just going from the top of my head. I think Rose Hill was 100%. Everyone wanted it because that was the first school. And then at your school, do you remember what the tally was?
Don't remember, but I remember that it was the majority, and we didn't have too many that weren't willing to do it. And they also said that they, though they didn't vote for it, they would definitely jump in
Right.
and support it. So.
Right. And then I don't know if the board wants it now. I do have one principal here, and they're experimenting. They're the school that does not have BT. They only had it at 1 5th grade class because we were trying to implement it at the schools that were going to feed into Kearney. So I don't know if Diego could give us a perspective from a principal how it affects their school, but he's here, and I know you have it at 5th grade, and you're thinking about moving it to next year.
Yeah, so we right now have it for 5th grade, but we have a split classroom for 4th and 5th grade, which we also use it. So we started, oh gosh, at the very beginning of the year, those were the only 2 classrooms. And Mr. McCall actually is our 4th grade teacher. And he was one of them that jumped up and said, I want to get those resources. So we opened it up for everyone at that point. And everyone was like, sharing passwords with one another in order to get the resources. And I wanted to make sure that they got their passwords. So we had a meeting, we had a conversation, and we had people sign up. If you are interested, if you would like to have our school be BT, sign up. And then, the majority of our teachers signed up for it. All the way kinder through 5th grade. So right now, all of our kinder through 5th grade classrooms have it. They have access to it. One thing that I did want to highlight was that it's an enrich and reteach. So enrich meaning that kids who got it, we're moving them forward, and kids who didn't get it, we're supporting them to get them there. So it's that differentiation that both of you talked about. But I wanted to be clear because it is targeting both groups of students who got it and who didn't get it. The other thing, in regards to the English language learners that you mentioned, Dr. Hyde, I think there are materials available there, but it's not all be, right? And I think that's where we go back to our teaching and our practice and how we develop that and support. I know that some schools are doing it with their biliteracy classrooms, and like for Hanson, we are doing it with our biliteracy classrooms. That means we're still doing it in Spanish, but we're targeting the standard, right? So it's all about the standards, the framework. It is not about, we have to do all those resources within this standard. It's about if the standard says kids need to be able to add double-digit numbers, that's exactly what we're doing, and those are the resources that we're pulling out from BT in order to support our kids get there. Does that?
And again, it's not a BT school. They only had 5th grade. Did not force it on them. Their teachers. It was volunteer. If you want BT, ask. And then BT was very generous to us. They're not charging us for that. They just said, give it a try.
Well, and also, with that comes the feedback that every teacher receives. So they're coming back tomorrow, and every time that they come in, they do walkthroughs through the classrooms, and then each teacher actually gets their own feedback. And then we go through that feedback as a school also to share, these are some areas that they highlighted. I know we've been doing it. I know we're implementing it. They just didn't see it. So I just want to make sure that, we are highlighting that every time that they come, or throughout the days. One of them was having a system where we all can get their attention, right? So one is the classrooms, like Ms. Dodger says macaroni and cheese, and they like that. Other teachers have another ones, high five, or college ready, or they just said, okay, but what about if you're by themselves, you're walking in, what kind of system do you have that is whole school? So we wanted to make sure that we were having that as well. So, there's a lot of good feedback that they've given us. We've created a framework. So what happens in literacy? What happens in math, to be very strategic about how do we support our kids get to the standard that they need. So, breaking down all the way to the minute. So we have 120 minutes for literacy. What happens during those 120 minutes, right, to support our kids? And one of them is doing the guided reading and supporting the students to reach their grade level, reading level. And if not, how do we get there to get them to the next reading level as well? So it's very strategic and very guided as to where the kids need to be as well.
To what extent are Chromebooks or other computers integrated into BT? Is that because we've heard a lot about the teach, reteach, and kind of individualized learning, letting kids go at their own pace and so forth. So is that fairly dependent upon having the Chromebooks or other computer
Yeah, I think it
Computers
goes
available?
Yeah, it goes both ways because right now we have computers for 3 of our classrooms. So our 5th grade classroom that is full BT does have them. Our 4th and 5th classroom has them. Our other classrooms don't have them, right? So we're finding new ways of how to support them, especially when we want to make sure that our kids are able to type, our kids able to drag and drop even some of those things. So we've been using the computer lab. Some classrooms now have 1 or 2 desktops, as well as maybe 1 or 2 Chromebooks that they borrow from other classrooms as well, or from the 4th and 5th grade classrooms to do the work in their classrooms as well. But I don't think you don't necessarily 100% need to have those computers there. I think they're very valuable and I think they're very needed. And I would love to have them available for all of my classrooms, but we're doing right now what we can with what we have. And I think, some of the things that I've seen, and I think Mr. Archuleta was there to observe our 5th graders using the computer, and is that they're doing PowerPoint presentations, they're doing a lot of writing assessments on it, they're getting feedback through, their teachers giving feedback regarding their assessments, they're doing presentations in front of the class. So it's preparing them to do more than just, typing or just writing the papers, doing researches, reading multiple articles and combining them to create a piece. So there's a lot of ways of using the technology, but again, it all goes back to what is the standard that we're trying to cover and support our kids get to.
I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming, and I appreciate everything y'all do for the district. I truly mean that. The purpose for me to ask y'all to come here was to see what we can do better, because in our turnaround plan with the Colorado Department of Education, the goal is to have the 11th and 12th graders at the high school, Chrome computers, all 6th graders at both middle schools, Chrome computers, and all 5th graders throughout the district with Chrome computers. And what this does is to help myself not to see why, is to see how we can make it better. And, just taking my notes is, how can we improve the Infinity Campus, make sure that the next teachers that's coming up, they can have those technology down. How can we improve the rubrics, as y'all was saying about? How can we improve things better in the district instead of why this wasn't done? I'm not finna sit here and say, well, how come you just found out things got better in January? Classes started in August. Now you rolling. So we took almost 4 months to get things better, but now you moving and things is going stronger. But now we have to think about those other teachers. The beginning of next year, we don't want them to be in January catching on. If we can help them with a good start in August, and the data analysis, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Dallas analysis, the board get a copy. I like to see from all the schools that got it each month, they Dallas analysis, to show us, the board, how they're improving each month. And then for themselves, they get to see what they done each month? Do Central, do they get to see their data analysis of all the classes and see where they improving at? Do Rose Hill classes, since they all in Hanson 4th graders, and that's what I'm saying. When we get the presentations from, we only had the 3 schools. We don't have Hanson 4th grade. We don't have the 5th grade. We're not seeing all the data that was supposed to be. If Rose Hill is, if Hanson 4th graders is doing it, BT, we don't see it. We don't see that presentation. We didn't see the data analysis. I like to see the measurements, the data analysis, not what BT says that this school's supposed to do this, implement this, this. So we're not seeing that. And with, I just think the technology, if more classes is getting technology, do you think we have to speed up the technology? Is it fast? Is it slow? If that's because we got older buildings, do we need to faster grade the technology up? Do we need more modems? How is
Yeah.
that going to affect? See, those are things we, as a district and as a team, we should know these things, not come August and then everything's shut down. We got to work together today to get these things working now and ahead of the curve.
Yeah,
we
and I
go-
think we are slotted to get some more computers, at least in my building, because we don't have a lot of technology that is available to our students, hands. But I think it is essential. We're thinking about science fair coming up and how prepared our kids are to give a presentation about their science fair. And to tell the truth, they're not ready. And they're not ready, once, because they don't know how to use the computer and do research. They're not ready because they have never been prompted to do presentations in front of someone. They're not ready because, they don't have the tools needed. One of the biggest things that I've been thinking about as a new leader in my school is that, they haven't had a technology teacher for a very long time. So how do I expect them to use technology properly when they haven't been taught, right?
So my question would be to you is, how can we do that? How can we get the technology
Yeah.
teacher in there?
I think is, how we have PE, how we have music, how we have art, we also should have a technology teacher available to teach our kids how to use technology properly. How to, I go back to drag and drop because, you won't believe how many kids you tell them, drag and drop this to the folder, and even some adults too, right? And in Google Drive, you say, just pull your assessment and drop it into the folder, and they look at you like, I have no idea what you're telling me to do. And it's not their fault, it's that they just never been taught how to do it. So we have to go all the way back to teach them those initial tools. But that's something definitely to consider, and I'm considering it for Hanson for next year as to how do I maneuver my school budget and my FTEs in order to provide that for my kids, because I know is needed. We're talking about the 21st century, and yet our students don't have 21st century skills when it comes to technology.
We're running out of time here, but I would like to ask Mr. Sands if you'd be willing to answer the same question regarding the high school and regarding math, in terms of the the integration and the need for computers in conjunction with BT.
Thank you, Diego.
Thank you.
Okay, a few things that we've gone through the same learning curve. So our kids are in high school, and we always kind of think of them as being tech savvy because they're carrying a little computer around in their pocket all the time. But it's not the same thing when you have to like organize and store. I will say there's one talking about to Mr. Thomas about some of the requirements. One of the things that we ran across, and this is something to keep in mind as we go along, we only have about 2 megabytes of storage per kid right now, or per student. I think of them as my kids, so I call them that. So that's really limited. That's only a few documents that they can keep. And we, this may be a little bit idealistic, but we would love for them to be able to keep their documents over a larger amount of time, like maybe all the way through high school. That I don't know what that costs or what's involved with that. But right now, 2 gig and using it in reading, somewhat in science and in math, is full in a little over probably about 10, 12 weeks. So we're having to have our kids go and delete things out of there, documents that they've built, created, and so on. And we don't really have a good way right now. So that's something that we need to address, is how for them to be able to, like, if you take notes in Algebra 1, you should be able to access those 2 years later in Algebra 2. For some of the things that our Algebra 2 teachers are having to go back and reteach, just because of the length of time between the 2 subjects. There's a full year in there for geometry in between. It would be terrific if they didn't have to start all over with notes. They could just say, hey, pull your notes out from your freshman year and let's read through them. Technology is one of the things that I wanted to talk about, Dr. Hyde, is our kids, Google has given us the ability to be able to do constructed responses in the second dimension. And what that means is that one of the big standards that we have to meet is kids being able to connect a table of values to a linear equation to a graph. It gives us the ability to post a background picture, and then it has the tools available for them to actually create the line on the graph. It gives them a place to explain what the line means, to talk about like slope, y-intercept, what's that mean in the real world. That's something that we could only do on paper before. And now it kind of looks more businessy, if I could use that term. It looks like things that they would see when they get out of high school. So I feel like that's been a huge leap forward in being able to help them understand how it works. I don't know, did I answer your
Yeah.
question?
No, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to, is there anybody else that wanted to talk about BT? We're good?
I just wanted to, Mr. Thomas was asking about data analysis, so we do that every Wednesday. Once a month, we turn that into our principal as grade levels. But I'm on building leadership team, and one thing we talked about just today is that next year, we would actually take that data analysis from every grade level, because there's a leadership, on the leadership team, there's a person from every grade level, and we would start looking at that data across the building, like kindergarten through fifth, and finding root causes and, really, because right now we're doing the data analysis, but we just need to do more with it.
Additionally, too, I wanted to add, I have STAR data here, and I'll send it your way, so you can compare BT schools up against the other schools in the district and see how that looks. Because I think that that's a nice way to see sort of what's going on. Reading and math grades 3, 4, 5.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Hanson also uses iStation as a form of supporting and interviewing for literacy and math. And I can share some data as well, that you can see that iStation and STAR data are very correlated, as well as DIVLS and EDEL are very correlated as to where our kids are heading and how one tool is supporting the other one to get ahead.
Additionally, I heard you mention technology and wanting to get that out. When I was kind of working with Brandon in that department, exactly what you said. So the plan, there was a big wave, a little over 1,000, I want to say, Chromebooks purchased. They're going out to the schools that you just named. So we're filling in 10th grade over at the high school. We're filling in, I want to say, back here of all the other places. There's Kearney Middle School, 6th grade, Adams City Middle School, 6th grade. We're filling in Hanson, 3rd and 4th. We're filling in potentially Kemp, if they choose that this is their thing, 3rd and 4th there. I think that's all of them, and then the other 2 schools are already equipped. So
But
those had to be in 2 different waves, only because the tech department isn't large enough. And what was going on in the past was they would purchase about 1,000, and the department would spend all summer trying to get the 1,000 prepped for building principals and whoever ordered those. And I know that the board, the board on your last decision with this was to purchase Chromebooks, so I wanted to honor that and get those out into schools as soon as possible. So,
But just like the gentleman mentioned earlier, if you're filling up the high school now and they need more megabytes, say 8 or 16.
absolutely. So that's another need I heard, and I'll be passing that off to Brandon and Sheila Burke.
And,
So.
I don't know if that's an extra cost to put it in.
I would imagine that it is, but it definitely, whatever it is, we're going to look into it and we'll get that information to Brandon, and he can. I know budgets are going to the CFO currently, and they can speak to that particular need.
And then you have to think about the freshmen and sophomores that's already there. They got Chrome computers. We
Yeah.
got to update those. So then you get in the other two grades, they got to update those. So I'm just thinking, how are you going to implement those computers to those students if it's
It's a good question. I think what you were speaking to was virtual type space.
Right, so this is
Okay.
cloud space, Google Cloud Space, so it's not, we wouldn't have to do a single thing to the computers. It's just a matter of, and this may be just, I don't know if this is something where they just, like, we'd have to talk to Brandon about it, but if they just set that as an arbitrary starting point, if there's more space, how much that space costs, if we do buy, it's just cloud space is what we're basically talking about. And then after you get done, Matt, there's one other thing.
No,
Also-
go.
Oh,
Go
yes.
for
And I'm sorry to hold this over here, but Mr. Thomas, you'd ask about potential things that we could use into the future. I have many friends that are in the education business, and one of the tools they use, math teachers, I should be specific about it, is IXL. IXL is a tool that is something that helps kids promote their learning. So when we were talking about the reteach and enrich piece, it's just more efficient. It's a computer program, and it's one of those user fees per child. But it might be something that we want to consider. It would help us be able to and I don't remember exactly, I think it was it Mr. Rolla or was it you, Mr. Thomas, that said about being able to get us rolling right from the get-go? That might be one of those things that would eliminate a barrier. So it might be something to consider and look into. And I can report more to you about it at another time.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your time. So we're going to move to Literacy Squared. We've got a presentation. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm very succinct, actually, so I'll be really quick. I just wanted to address Dr. Hyde's question about the ELD piece of it, because
Excuse me, could you identify? who
I'm
you-
Eileen Harder. I'm from Hanson
Okay.
Elementary, and I'm an instructional coach. And I wanted to say that the Beyond Textbooks was really not developed specifically for ELD learners. I wanted to reiterate what everybody else has said tonight. It's really a curricular framework. It is not a curriculum. The difference being that it is really used more for its scope and sequence of standards than anything. So when our principal decided to ask teachers if they wanted to use that or invite teachers to use that, the real positive thing about that is that everybody is on the same scope and sequence with standards. We're teaching in a unified manner. You can go through classrooms from an outside perspective and see alignment throughout those classrooms. We use other programs in the district to support our English language learners. We use Literacy Squared for literacy-based ELD. We use systematic ELD as well in classrooms. And a myriad and variety of other things to support our ELD learners. So I think that the feedback that you're getting on BT tonight is from the positives that, in a unification sense, that BT brings to the district.
Thank you.
Sure.
So now we're going to move on to Literacy Squared. Just so everybody, excuse me, just so everybody knows, we were going to have a turnaround update from Lisa Medler. She's not going to be able to make it tonight, so we're going to need to amend the agenda tonight with that. So Literacy Squared will be our last
Next presentation.
session here that we have.
Good afternoon, President Archuleta and members of the Adams 12 School Board. My name is Sandra Butfalowski, and I am the Principal Investigator and Project Director of Literacy Squared here in Adams 14. I work at the Bueno Center at the University of Colorado Boulder, and accompanying me tonight is Dr. Kathy Escamilla, who is also a PI on the Literacy Squared project and a professor at CU Boulder. So thanks for allowing us time to present our results from the Literacy Squared project. These are reports from the 2016-2017 technical report that was produced in the fall. And so I'm just going to go over the main highlights of the technical report with you. Just a little background on Literacy Squared. So this is a national research and professional development project. It's been implemented in 12 school districts in 5 states in the U.S. We have provided professional development to the state of Illinois, to Syracuse, to Minneapolis, and many other school districts across the country. We have produced 15 peer-reviewed journal articles, 10 chapters and books, and we have 1 book published, and we're planning another one. Our partnership with Adams 14 commenced in 2015, and our project and contract ends at the end of this school year in 2018. And what we intended to do was to bring back a modified version of bilingual instruction to your schools, specifically biliteracy instruction. Currently, we implement the project officially in 4 schools, and we have been following 2 cohort groups for the last 2.5 years. So 4 components make up Literacy Squared. So if you implement Literacy Squared, you're implementing the research aspect of the project. So we're not only research-based, but we also examine student results. We implement professional development for teachers and school leaders. We look at assessment in 2 languages. So what we really want to do in our project is track how students are learning in both their reading and writing development in both Spanish and English. And unique to Adams 14 is we have a oral language assessment as well. And finally, the instructional model, which I'll talk a little bit more briefly here. So we implemented the project fully in the 1st and 2nd grades at these 4 schools, DuPont, Hanson, Kemp, and Monaco. So we implemented in 15-16, 16-17, and we are currently in the schools this year as well. So professional development in 2016 and 17 really focused on helping teachers look at how to apply the instructional framework, the biliteracy framework, to the benchmark materials. So the Adelante and the advanced materials. We held 6 whole group sessions. There were 2 learning labs, and we provided about 120 hours of on-site support. So that includes coaching, planning, and co-teaching with teachers. So the instructional component, I think, is really important to understand. So when we teach biliteracy, what we do is we're teaching Spanish literacy with literacy-based ELD. So literacy-based ELD is a form of teaching ELD, but what's unique to this form of ELD is that it's book-based, it's text-based. So we really work with children around connecting what they're doing in Spanish literacy with what they're doing in literacy-based ELD. And instruction revolves around reading texts, providing a lot of instruction around language, which we call oracy, and writing instruction as well. It's important to note that our program was really designed to start in kindergarten and continue through the 5th grade. So in most sites where we've worked, we have implemented from kindergarten through 5th grade. So the time allocations here in Adams were built around ensuring students had 2 hours of Spanish literacy and 1 hour of literacy-based ELD in 1st and 2nd grade. And that was last year. And so this year it follows the same model. These are our outcomes that we reported in the technical report. So there were essentially 4 questions that we asked, looking at oral language development in Spanish and English. The second question asked, how are kids progressing in their biliterate writing development in Spanish and English? What were their gains in reading in Spanish and English? And finally, how did they perform on the access test? So for each question, we only analyzed data on students who had complete data sets so we have 2 cohort groups. Cohort 1 started literacy squared in kindergarten in 2015-16. So last year, they were in first grade. So we looked at, do they have a complete data set to analyze and report? Cohort 2 students started biliteracy instruction in first grade in 15-16, and last year they were in second grade. So research question 1 asked, what are emerging bilingual students' Spanish and English listening and speaking proficiency levels in 2015 and in 2016 as measured by the Stanford Spanish Language Proficiency Test and Stanford English Language Proficiency Test? So those are the acronyms, SSLP and SELP. So we examine results by cohort group. So in Spanish, oral language proficiency. So we looked at listening and speaking scores. What's important to highlight here is in 2015, when we first gave the test, students were at that basic or intermediate level in listening and speaking skills. 1 year later, we had a large movement of students who moved into that proficient range. So that's a nice learning achievement in just 1 year in Spanish for cohort 1. In English, again, we see something that's quite similar. So students in speaking were at the basic levels of proficiency in English, and in listening, they were at the intermediate levels in 2015. And in 2016, we see the majority of kids move into that proficient range. So that's really nice growth for just 1 year. For cohort 2, kids were a bit more advanced in their listening skills. And in that the cohort 1 was at basic, these kids were at their intermediate level logically because they had less instruction in Spanish, but they moved into that proficient range again with just 1 year of instruction. And in their English skills, we see kids divided in their listening, speaking skills in 15 at that intermediate and proficient level. But then in 1 year, we see the bulk of kids move into that proficient range. Research question 2 looked at kids, what are their Spanish and English writing development as measured by the Literacy Squared writing rubric from spring 2016 to spring 2017. So the instrument we used to look at writing development was designed by us, so it was tested with hundreds of kids. And what we do is we examine both writing in Spanish and in English. And there are 3 areas that we look at. We look at content, structural elements, which include punctuation, and then spelling. And the composite score, so the maximum score they can get in all 3 areas is 21 points. So cohort 1, the blue line graph shows how they progressed in their Spanish writing development from kindergarten to the end of, so the end of kindergarten to the end of first grade. So what you'll see is in Spanish, they're around scoring 8 points, and they increased to 10 points, which means at the end of kindergarten, they were writing about 1 complete sentence, and at the end of first grade, they were writing a main idea with many details. And their progression in English follows that of Spanish. So they're scoring very similarly in both languages, which means well, I'll talk about the implications, but what they do in Spanish, they perform as well in English, essentially. Cohort 2, so these are the students who were in first grade and then in second grade last year. They ended at first grade around scoring 9 and ended around a 10. So they made an increase in about 1 level. Research question 3 asked, what gains were made by students in Spanish and English reading as measured by the EDL2 and the DRA2 from spring 2016 to spring 2017? So the EDL2 and the DRA2, if you're not familiar with them, are informal reading measures, but we selected them because they are similar ways to record how students are progressing in their Spanish and English reading development. So for cohort 1, at the end of their kindergarten year, they were at a level 1, essentially close to a level 2. And at the end of first grade, they were reading at a level 10 in Spanish and a level 8 in English. So again, they're scoring very comparably in both languages. A level 2 is around middle of kindergarten. A level 10 is about beginning of spring of first grade year, but they made a full year's growth in 1 year, which is pretty good in both languages. Cohort 2 ended first grade reading a level 4 and ended second grade reading at around a level 16 in both languages. So again, we see a full year's growth occurring in both languages for both cohort groups. Research 4, question 4 asked what were emerging bilingual students' access proficiency levels in 2016 and 2017. So something to note here is that the cut scores changed from 2016 to 2017 as measured by the access test. And so what that means is that the benchmark increased, and so you'll see this in the results. So cohort 1, when they were tested in mid-year kindergarten, the majority of students were at an entering level of English language proficiency. In first grade, the same time of year, most of the kids improved up to the developing area of English language proficiency. And keep in mind that the cut scores did increase. So we see a big jump in kids' English language proficiency skills really increased quite a bit. For cohort 2, we did not see any growth, and this could be due to the cut scores that had shifted. And so recently I received data from your research department here with the new cut scores, so I'd like to re-examine what kind of growth occurred for cohort 2 students. I'm not saying that they didn't, but we need to keep in mind that the assessment did change. The cut scores changed for that group for that year. So finally, what does this all mean? What we saw is that all of the children that were in the research group progressed in both of their language, in oral, in their speaking, their listening, their reading, and their writing in both languages. We need to keep in mind that cohort 1 began biliteracy instruction in kindergarten, and cohort 2 began biliteracy, so they had no Spanish instruction in kindergarten and started Spanish instruction when they entered in first grade. So findings with cohort 1, as you noticed, they were always a little bit greater than what the second cohort did, is very consistent with our other research sites. So when we provide kindergartners with biliteracy instruction, we can see that they accelerate in both languages at a faster rate than comparison groups. And what we really want to emphasize is that we saw great growth in 1 year. We saw both cohort groups increase their literacy skills in both languages in just 1 year. If we continue and sustain this kind of instruction, we can only anticipate that they will accelerate in their biliteracy development. So that's all I'd like to share from our research from the 2 years that we've worked here in the district, and I'd be happy to field any questions if you have them.
I have a couple questions. The first one is, I know that the Literacy Square program has been discussed for some time, and our superintendent has said we ought to get together and talk about this. And I think that has happened to some extent, but I guess I'd like to know from, I guess, the superintendent as well as from you, whether that was a satisfactory meeting of the minds, and whether, because I think our superintendent had said, this is a paraphrase, but, let's get together and we'll, look at our data and look at your data. And I wondered if you've reconciled those two different databases or whatever data that you are referring to. Essentially, to shorten that question, I guess my question is almost more for Dr. Abrego than for you, but I'd like, it's great that you're both here. Are you kind of in agreement with what we've just been presented.
I think you said that the students that started in kindergarten did better than the ones that started in first grade, correct?
I'm saying they're both
they're
making the
progress.
same amount of growth, but the kindergartners are a bit ahead of where that second cohort is. Yep. But that's not due to, I mean, what we need to say is that they are growing and acknowledge that, and that we need acceleration. So I think the way we can improve and get them accelerators to make sure the program is implemented with fidelity, in manners in which it was designed to be implemented.
Correct.
So let me back into the question from the other direction. When you met with the superintendent, did you see whatever data it was that he was presenting, and did that did that make sense from a research point of view? Was it consistent with your findings?
Well, the measures are quite different that they used. So they're using the DIBELS and the EDEL to track growth. And I can't even say they were tracking growth, because the EDEL and the DIBELS were just implemented this school year. So there's no way to make the same kind of inferences as we are, because we only have data points from fall of 17 to the middle of the school year of 18. And so to make these kind of implications around, are they presenting the same kind of data? I can't say that they are.
See,
but they
I'm
were
trying to-
presented to me.
I'm trying to
Yes.
avoid an ongoing discussion where there is no consensus, or there is no coming together of two disparate positions. And without some kind of a consensus, it's extremely difficult for the board to see a clear path forward. And so I understand what you presented, and it all makes sense. But if that's not kind of understood and agreed to by all parties, then it's questionable what progress we can make. That's long-winded, but let me move on to my second question.
Well, before you move on,
Sure.
did you want to answer the first question?
I didn't understand the question.
I know.
Pretty long,
I apologize.
but I think what are you trying to ask? I mean, I think what you're. I think what we have here, Dr. Hyatt, is we've looked at your data. I think the concerns that we have as a district is our demands are a little bit different because of the situation we're in, but we try to measure how many students are on read plans. That's very important for us. We try to measure how our students perform on the CMAS test, which is coming up in April. And I mean, I'm curious to see that because our kids have been with you for 3 years. I think that's very important that we follow them and find out how they perform. And also, you're right, DIBELS is new, but it indicates, it predicts where the kids are at as far as to the read plan. So those are things that we're looking at. But as far as their program, I think it's a very good program. I think we've learned an awful lot from your 3-year study, and I think we're going to continue to use many of those things.
My second question has to do with, I think it's the fourth point on your conclusions, and that is it's dependent upon the high quality instruction. And how do you control for the quality of instruction?
One way, there are a couple ways. Ensure that the minimum time allocations are respected and maintained. And so 2 hours of Spanish literacy instruction need to be implemented daily. And I know that there have been interruptions around that this year. I also want to make a point about professional development and how important it is for teachers to have access to the professional development that we offer. And for, I don't know which reasons, but Literacy Squared is not a required professional development for the biliteracy teachers. So all of our professional developments have been scheduled outside of your normally scheduled professional development days. And so it's, teachers are compensated for coming, but it's not a requirement in a sense. And so there's no way to develop a real sense of consistency if not all teachers are receiving the same information. So those are two ways I would say that we need to ensure the quality of the program.
What of the how many of the teachers who are nominally enrolled or subscribed to your program participate in a majority of the PD sessions?
Here at Adams 14?
Yes.
I'd say
That's one of the problems you're saying is inconsistent participation. Is that right?
yeah, I would. Probably about 60%, I'd say, 70%.
Okay.
The presentation you just presented to us is not the presentation you had on Chalkbeat. These are two different presentations, because the one on Chalkbeat I looked at had more numbers to deal with, and then you spoke about the professional development in there and how y'all go to the schools. And so what you telling Dr. Hyde is that stopped this year, because the Chalkbeat, that had everything in it, what you do, broke it down step by step. So that wasn't in this presentation.
Well, it was a summation. There was no way I could go through all the details of the actual technical report, but we offered 6 professional development sessions that were a whole group for all of the teachers, and then we provided about over 120 hours of on-site support. That means that our team works individually or with grade levels, planning, modeling. I mean, those are all things that we did in addition to just the professional development sessions. But those 6 whole sessions that we hold is where we really go over what the expectations are of how you would implement a certain strategy. I think also, when you talked about the data that were presented from the district, I would have to say that sure, we have similar findings using different measures in a way, in that most of the kids are not on grade level in cohort 2, and that's similar to what was indicated with the EDEL and the DIBELS. But that, I think that's beyond the project itself. I think it's looking at baseline data where students start, and I think what we are reporting in our work here is that kids are growing. It's a matter of can they catch up to where they have to be, and that's maybe more of a systemic kind of a question that needs to be addressed.
We've had discussion. The board's had discussions, or kind of informal, I guess, but saying that we have a number of students who are not reading, or perhaps writing and so forth, in any language, and I think one of the arguments is that if that's the case, we ought to focus on one language to try to get them to be able to read in a language, rather than to continue to push for the ability to read in 2 languages. How would you respond to that?
Overwhelmingly, empirical research has demonstrated that providing English-only instruction for English learners is not advantageous. There's no benefit to it. So the best route to go, most research has shown, to teach students in both languages. And so there's nothing to substantiate that.
We certainly could bring some writing samples of our students, if you would like to
Right.
see. I would put our second grade writing student samples that I've seen this year up against any that are in any of our.
So you're
Right.
saying the students that have been coming through the Bueno Center are doing, they may be below grade level, but they are reading.
Yeah, to say that they are not
Writing,
reading or
yes,
writing
yeah,
in
yeah,
either
so-
language is, that is
So-
not correct. That is not true. That
Okay,
is not true.
Because I've heard that,
There may be a handful of students who have difficulties,
right,
but the majority of students are reading and are writing in both languages.
right. Now, how are those students selected?
My understanding is, I think someone else needs to answer that question. My understanding was that information sessions went out to parents at schools, and parents were told about the biliteracy program, and then parents opted into the program if they wanted to.
I'm not sure. I wasn't here when they did that.
Forced choice.
There was no forced choice. I don't believe
Oh.
that they were hand-selected and placed into biliteracy classrooms or English only. I do believe that the parents had the choice to opt their children into the biliteracy strand or not.
Okay. And this may be my last question, but where the district's considering or evaluating the appropriateness of extending biliteracy into the 4th and 5th grades. And I've heard that there's a shortage of qualified biliterate teachers. Is that something that you perceive as the case or not?
Yeah, I would say that there are shortages of bilingual teachers, but I think that with good recruitment methods and a good incentives and a good school and district environment, that teachers would come.
I think also with the grant that we have the partnership that we're trying to promote more teachers. I think you're helping us. We're helping in, the 1/3 grant where you guys pick up 1/3.
The endorsement
Right.
master's program. Mhm.
We're only talking about 4 teachers for 4th grade, right?
Well, not if they went on in all the schools. So currently there are 36 biliteracy classrooms, and then I think it would add, I'm not sure, probably at least 8, maybe 10 the most for 4th grade, and then you roll it up into 5th grade. Because you can't just go to 5th grade. You'd have to do 4th grade for next year, and then the following year, 5th grade. And I know of I do know teachers in different districts where there's gentrification going on and bilingual programs are, kind of being reduced. And so a great effort needs to be made to recruit those teachers, but I think it's quite possible.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
So we don't have a turnaround update from Lisa Medler, so we have about 20 minutes. Lisa wasn't able to make it tonight. She's not able to make it, so we will get an update from her soon. So with that, let's break until 6:30.